So maybe I can use these minutes before, these seconds before Geshe is coming, just to let you, to remind you all, first to welcome you, and to remind you that if you want to ask questions, to send questions to Geshe, please mail them to the lead. She'll be happy to forward them to Geshe. Also, if you feel, if you can, if you wish to practice generosity, the lead has already wrote in the chat. Hello, Geshe, good evening.
Hello.
So I'd like to welcome all of you. Thank you very much for joining us again this week for this precious teaching. Thank you, Geshe, for teaching us, and let's enjoy this session today as well. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Leora. Okay. As usual, we start with a short breathing meditation followed by setting the motivation. So let's start doing that. So then let's start with visualizing in the space in front of us Buddha Shakyamuni, who appears as inseparable from your Upasana Lama, as a manifestation of wisdom, compassion, and so forth. Inspiring us to reach the same state as the Buddha did. And then surrounding the Buddha are the great Indian masters. Nagarjuna, Buddhapalita, Bhavaviveka, Chandakirti, Shantideva, and so forth. Great masters and practitioners who followed the words of the Buddha and attained high realizations. Similarly, the masters of Tibet and of other countries where the Dharma has flourished. And all of them being of one nature with the Upasana Lama. a source of refuge, inspiration, and blessing. Just think that you can feel the presence of these masters right in front of you. And then surrounding you and the front visualization are all sentient beings. Covering the entire horizon. Experiencing endless suffering, pain, anxiety, and so forth. Helplessly wandering in cyclic existence without any control. Their mind being completely pure. And that's having the potential to become enlightened. Without knowing how to reach that state. And based on the understanding that sentient beings are just like ourselves, let's generate affectionate love indiscriminately towards each and one of them. Feeling of closeness, acceptance, and sincere affection. And that affectionate love then gives way to great compassion. The sincere wish, may each and every one of sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. And may I be able to lead them towards a state that is free from all their misery and that which causes it. Try to really feel that from the depth of your heart, that strong wish. That deep aspiration. Which then becomes stronger and turns into the determination to lead sentient beings to a state of freedom. That's the altruistic attitude. That then gives way to the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. May I, as quickly as possible, attain the state of a Buddha in order to be of greatest benefit to whoever is not enlightened yet. And it's with this aspiration, with this determination to become fully enlightened, I will listen, study Chandakirti's text. And then with this motivation, without letting go of this motivation, let's recite the prayers. While focusing on each word, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then specifically directed at the front visualizations. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Okay, great. And again, for this coming week, as to what to focus on, I've said it so many times, but well, there's no end to this practice. Of course, bodhicitta, to generate the mind of enlightenment over and over again. And if you've done this so far, you may have also noticed, and this is something Jimmy actually said in one of his comments, that the way to practice bodhicitta is not just to become enlightened. It's not just to have that goal in mind. Of course, that's where this is going, or what this is causing, but it's also to be extremely beneficial right here and now. I mean, that's definitely the purpose of it. So we need to understand it really helps us in that moment. And as I said, if you've done this so far, you may have already noticed that most of our problems, problems in everyday life, difficulties, doubts, fears, and so forth, and of course, usually in combination with the afflictive emotions, are a form of narrow-mindedness. Our mind kind of closes itself. It's almost like you put on blinkers, like a horse with blinkers, and you can only see what's right in front of you, if you like your own situation. And it just leads to this really closed mind, which just enhances whatever is bothering us, whatever causes us to suffer, causes us pain. And bodhicitta, it's a state of mind that has the opposite direction, like in terms of, not direction in the literal sense, but it opens the mind. It opens the mind to all sentient beings. And it's a great antidote to any type of narrow-mindedness, closed-mindedness, which is part of the problem, is part of the suffering. So again, as for this coming week, whenever you feel miserable, and of course, if you can also do it at times when you feel really good, but in particular, when you feel closed-minded, when you feel narrow-minded, upset, hateful, anxious, and so forth, to definitely generate this mind and watch how it actually opens up your mind, and already reduces the problem just by generating this kind of attitude. So to continuously do this, to be able, of course, move closer towards enlightenment in the long term, but also to help us to deal with everyday problems, everyday issues. But also as part of that, or as a continuation from what we started last week, well, to focus on particular, well, we've lived before, we're going to live again. It's not just this life. This life is, in relation to all the other lives, is so short, however long it feels, but compared to the other lives, it's really short. So only a short time we will spend in this particular body, and then we'll move on, and our relationships with other people, of course, will change. And to get really into this idea that everyone has been, well, in every kind of relationship towards us, as in like worldly relationships, mother, father, grandparents, lovers, enemies, people we didn't know, strangers. I mean, there's not a single relationships. And here, of course, we rely on what the Buddha told us, but as we've heard, the Buddha has told us about the Four Noble Truths, about emptiness. These ideas we can gain some understanding of, and we can reap the full benefit of understanding the Four Noble Truths, the disadvantages of the afflictive emotions, and so forth. And if we think that the Buddha taught us that, well, why would he lie about past and future lives? So although we may have to take it on faith to a certain degree, or we don't have to, but we may choose to do so, it's not blind faith, but it's a kind of faith that's based on the idea that everything else has made sense so far. Why would the Buddha lie to us? And of course, most importantly, it makes sense that our mind continues on to exist, has existed before. This experiencing entity has not started with the beginning of this life's body, since it's a different entity. It works, it has a different nature from this body. So this experiencing entity has existed since the beginning of this time and will never have an end, thinking of your own mental continuum. So that's, of course, very powerful reasoning. But focusing on that, but mainly this time also focusing on the fact that, well, since we've lived for so many countless of lifetimes, and just because we don't remember, or we have no mind that perceives that right now, there's not a single awareness of that, well, it doesn't make it true, because we've forgotten, and we've forgotten so much more. We've forgotten also when we were little children, when we were babies. So we still believe that it happened. So just because we don't remember, we're not aware of it, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And on top of that, well, because we've had any type of relationship that is possible, but think of someone you're extremely close to in this lifetime, someone you're, maybe your parents and maybe your mother. If you can use your mother, then great. That's, as you're probably aware, it's usually who you focus on. And if you have a difficult relationship with your mother, you may think of a mother who's, in your eyes, the perfect kind of mother. Well, if you haven't had this kind of mother in this lifetime, well, we've probably had an incredibly, well, perfect, be difficult, but we had incredible mothers in our past lives. And even our own mother this life was this incredible mother in the past life, endless times. And so has everyone else. There's no relationship that we haven't had with others. And so either you take your own mother or someone you're so close to, that you're so grateful towards, and think that everyone has once been that person. I'd like you to specifically focus on this for this coming week, as, again, as you remember, part of this process of generating bodhicitta in a more gradual kind of sense, and to take both techniques into consideration, starting with becoming aware that all sentient beings have at some point been so close to us. Please really make time, really spend some time, however difficult it seems right now, and just do it. and see how it may affect your mind. So that's for this coming week, for the next week, or this week actually. And then I received a question that I believe was sent last week. Anyway, so it's about, I think it's Jimmy's question. Not sure I find it right away. But anyway, he mentioned, well, this was in relation to Kelsey's question. That's right, about 2 weeks ago. So he's just saying that, well, in terms of language, that of course mindfulness is also really important, how we verbally express something, that sometimes we're not very precise. And I guess it has to do with like, well, I was hit by the car, whereas in actuality it was the car itself. But that he says, like, actually the sensation of touching my body is actually something is touching my body. So my body or something touching my body, it usually goes hand in hand, that I become aware, for instance, the fabric of my clothes touching the body, and in that way I become aware of my body, for instance. So I can't read the whole thing, it's quite long, but he says that, well, the problem is oftentimes that we think of, for instance, if another nation invades us, this thought, even if it's thousands of kilometers away, there's this thought, I was invaded, when in actuality, we just identify with a certain group of people. And so this can be quite dangerous, can lead to a lot of hatred. And yeah, of course, this idea, and I think when I read this comment, I was reminded of what His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been teaching for many years now. I mean, has emphasizing over and over, it's like a form of meditation, if you will, kind of saying again and again, just for us to become more familiar with this idea of the oneness of all humanity, especially stressed humanity. And he also said, well, those times where we thought my nation, your nation, my people, or my community, their community, that's outdated. We should be thinking, this day and age, we're all human. And so to not create this divide. And so I think, he basically also stressed that, and the mindfulness of the way we identify self and others and so forth. Anyway, as I said, it would take too long to read it all. It's quite a long comment. And he also says, well, it's also in the Bible, I mean, in the Christian Bible, when Jesus says it's best to not speak at all. And of course, here talking about gossip and about close-mindedness and so forth. So yeah, definitely, I would agree with him that it's important to be mindful with what we say. Okay, great. So since it wasn't a question, so that's all I got to say about this. But and like I said, I totally agree with what he said. But then returning to the material, the text itself, well, since this is one of the most important topics, it's, well, yeah, the most important, I don't know, but really extremely important, and extremely important, especially for us beginners, if we meditate on emptiness. Because we do very much start off with identify or looking at the I, kind of analyzing the I, how do I exist? And the last meditation we did, well, there are different ways of doing meditation, of course, and you have always very little time only. I have stressed, for instance, well, maybe not on this class, it was actually under which's class, it came up in that class more. But anyway, I'll repeat it. So to focus on one hand, just on the absence of self, the absence of, or not being able to find the self, but that is not enough, because then, and this is based on what Geshe Kelsang has taught on many occasions, that we then need to end the meditation, having searched for the I, not having been able to find it, but to not just focus on that negation part, but also to bring it together with dependent arising. So that's definitely one way to meditate on this. And we haven't done this that much. What I like to do, and we did this last time, I find that important, especially for us when we take these difficult ideas and try to integrate them into our daily life. Sometimes it's difficult to take that step, but to understand if that self, the self I'm obsessed about the whole time, that is ever present, that sense of something there that I need to protect, I need to gratify, I need to look for, I need to strive for its success, its popularity, and so forth. Well, if that I can't be found, what does that mean to my life? How much more time do I have? How much more space do I have in my mind, not having to obsess about something that has never been there? So to kind of right away bring that into our daily life. And I hope that you will apply actually these ideas, but for that we need to go through the reasonings again and again. This is why I just want to spend the time briefly go over a little bit of what we did before. So, and it'll be shorter every time we do it. But in this case, I really want to stress this repetition for us, that these difficult reasons or reasonings go deeper and become more part of our everyday life. So, as we all know, we were told in verse 120, all our problems come from self-grasping. All our problems have their origin in that. And if the self really existed the way it appears, it would lead to this kind of self, this kind of I that goes beyond just mere labeling, that there's really something there. That would lead to two extremes, two alternate extremes. So either this or that. Either our self would be one with the aggregates or different. So these are just intellectually acquired. I mean, there's some people who have these views. There's some people who have these two extreme views. They actually only result from that innate view we all carry within us. But there are some who hold these two extreme views that arise from that, which would be either the self is one with the aggregates or totally separate. And those views, those who hold these views, those are not innate views. They're intellectually acquired, as in like based on that view. They then arise, but it's very helpful to refute these two views first, these two extremes first, and then based on that, we can understand how the self really exists. Okay, now I hope this is clear, that the fact that the I is not one with its parts, nor is it inherently different or separate from its parts, or that this inherent I is not separate from its parts. Once we understand that, we have not understood emptiness yet, because that is just the reason, the proof. It is just the sign that indicates the self doesn't exist that way. It still needs a further step to then understand the self doesn't exist inherently, and to believe that this reasoning, going through it once or twice and we understand emptiness, well, I think it's obvious by now, it's not as easy as that. It requires repetition. But having said this, so actually from verse 121 to 125, the text does deal with the idea of the self being separate from the aggregates. And are there philosophers who hold these views? Like we already heard that innately, we don't carry this view. So this is quite interesting. We do perceive it of an inherent I, but we innately believe that this inherent I, there's something there. But there's no inherent sense that this I is separate from mind and body, nor is there inherent sense that it's the same in general, right? So we kind of have a sense it's connected, but it's not exactly the same, except for certain times when we possibly identify strongly with the body, we identify strongly with a certain feeling. At this moment, we may feel, I am my anger, I am my feeling, I am my body, but that's only in extreme cases. All right. So then, if that's the case, that this view of the I being one with the aggregates, if that's not intellectually, if that's not innate, well, who holds this view? We've already heard, to a certain degree, non-Buddhist schools, who have, of course, a very sophisticated way of describing the self, but to rephrase the way they describe the self, to kind of roughly summarize it, well, it's a kind of permanent, independent, partless, independent I. So here the emphasis is on partless, on independent, like totally separate from mind and body, the way they set it forth. So that would be the kind of I that is totally separate from mind and body. And we all understand why that's impossible. But of course, in the sphere of meditation, or in the space of meditation, it becomes much more effective to really grasp this impossible scenario of the I existing in that way. But it does bring me to something that I haven't stressed enough yet, I believe. The fact that actually there are 3 types of selflessness prescribed in the Buddhist scriptures. And some of you are very familiar with that. So for you, if you've just heard something you've heard many times, but for those who are not familiar with that, I think it's important to stress this again. You could add more types, more selflessness to it, in the sense that selflessness here just means the absence of a misperceived self. So there's so many endless ways in which we can misperceive the I. The underlying misperception, of course, is always the sense that there's an inherent I. But then based on that understanding, we have all sorts of weird ideas. Only 2, other than this root misperception, there's only 2 more that are described in the text. But I believe, there's no end to our misapprehension when it comes to me, for instance, to I. So the 2 misapprehensions here are, first, this intellectually acquired one that is introduced to us by some of the non-Buddhist schools, a permanent, partless, independent self. We don't really carry that kind of view. Permanent is definitely a further view, in the sense that we do hold on to the I to a certain degree, being unchanging, at least in the frame of like a short period of time. It seems it's unchanging. It's the same I. All right. So there's that. And then further than that, and on top of that, then, so we have the sense there's a permanent, partless, independent self. On top of that, there is also the sense that there is a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. You've also heard me use that description. So this type of I, it's not this intellectually acquired, there's some totally separate I, which is, although based on the innate sense there's an inherent I, is intellectually acquired. We don't innately feel that way, but this sense of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, that is an innate sense, but it's still coarser. It's coarser than the sense of an inherently existent I. So on top of the sense of an inherently existent I, we believe that there is a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, which means there's a totally separate entity that's a controller of mind and body, that you could theoretically exchange such an I from mind and body. So it's not just the sense there's something there besides labeling the I, but there's really just something very concrete, a concrete I, a controller, a utilizer of mind and body, the owner of mind and body. So that's the kind of sense. Yang Rinpoche put it that this owner of the mind and body is not really dependent on mind and body. It's rather the other way around, like a king and his subjects, as in like the subjects could be anyone, but for the subjects, the king is really important. So there's more of a reliance of the subjects of the king on the king than the other way around. Okay, so that is this sense of an I. And you may wonder, where does that arise from? Well, I guess there are lots of analogies and examples you could use where you have a basic misapprehension that's deeper than all the other ones, and then out of that coarser types of misapprehensions arise. Okay, so having said this, hopefully it's a little clearer that there are at least these three levels. Holding on to a permanent partner's independent self. And then once you get rid of that, you may still be holding on to a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, as in like the I being the owner, the controller of mind and body. And even if you get rid of that, you may still be left with the sense, okay, there's no controller I, no permanent I, none of that, but there's still this kind of, there's something there. And that would be the deepest level, which we're trying to get at here. But as you know, probably from your own experience, well, at different times, a different type of I arises. And that is so difficult to identify that. That's initially the greatest difficulty, to identify the different types of I's in different moments. And well, it's a little easier, let's put it that way. It's a little easier to do this in the quiet of your room, when you don't feel like you're watched by anyone, when you don't feel like you have to be someone. And you start off with this, just maybe remembering a situation that was stressful when there was a strong sense of I. And even if you don't feel that is helpful, you may just get a sense of I, just sitting there quietly and just watch the I. But then also make a point when you're with others. And when there's a situation you find stressful, I mean, sometimes with people you want to impress, or when you're around people you find stressful. And, if you feel especially stressful in the presence of certain people, then watch the I when you're in the presence of strangers and so forth. So I know I'm loading you with lots of things to do, past and future lives, bodhicitta and so forth. But of course, with familiarity, it becomes easier. So to also, every now and then, focus on your sense of an I, the sense of this innate, the sense of an inherent, intrinsic kind of I that innately kind of arises. And that is hard to pinpoint. We know the words. We know the words described in the text, and intellectually we may know what they refer to, but now to bring that together with our own experience, well, that takes some time. Okay. Anyway, we've understood how the I is not separate from mind and body. And then starting with verse 126, we also learn that the I is not one with mind and body. It's not the same as mind and body. Yes, so 126, no, 136. I'm just quickly going over it again. And so there is this view that the aggregates are the I, that this inherent I that exists, the lower schools, for instance. So now it's no longer the non-Buddhist schools who hold the view of a separate I, but here it's the non-Buddhist, it's the Buddhist schools other than the Prasangika, who hold that there's an I that is the aggregates. If it's just the mental consciousness, and to all of us, they're helpful. So again, to not dismiss these views, but check whether it makes sense to you. And then find that these ideas of some of the non-Prasangika Buddhist schools, so by Bhashika and so forth, if you find like, oh, that makes more sense to me, well, then you become aware, you become conscious of the fact there's more work to be done, because the sense that all five aggregates are the I, well, that may be prevalent, or that the mental consciousness is the I. And so that wrong view that we hold, well, we're made aware of. So that's an important step. It's all part of this process of becoming aware of how we actually look at ourselves. That is the great mystery. That is so difficult. It's so extremely difficult. Why? Because we're not used to look at that. We're not used to, for us, it's just there. The I is just there. We're just not used to identifying it that way. Okay, and when the I is really strong, when the sense of an I is really strong, we're busy with other things. So it's like maybe trying to impress someone, or being especially eloquent, or not being wrongly accused of something, and so forth. All right. Anyway, now we've already discussed this idea if the self is many, if the I is all of the 5 aggregates, well, we end up with many aggregates, and that's a problem. Of course, if there's a self-sufficient kind of, an inherently existent I, it is difficult to account for the I continuing after nirvana. Change becomes difficult, karma becomes difficult, all that we already discussed to a certain degree. So all these verses, 126, 127, 128, all the way to 131, no need to go over them. So we've already discussed those. But then, and I will next time again to remind you, but then if we come to 132, 132, 133, okay, so here someone is merely quoting the Buddha, is merely saying, well, but the Buddha said so, that the person is the aggregates. And of course, we then learn, well, that was just meant to refute an I that is totally separate from the aggregates. But in actuality, the Buddha has been very clear, the body, the person cannot be the aggregates. All right. The mental consciousness, and here it's not that clearly laid out in the text, but it's implied, the mental consciousness, that was the I. Well, what about the body? And furthermore, if we think, and this is, well, that's the mental consciousness, it's definitely the main aggregate, it's the most important aggregate, no question, I mean, no doubt about that. Of course, the body, we keep changing the body, the sense consciousnesses, they arise newly based on a new body. All right, so the mental consciousness is the one that is most consistently with us. I mean, that continuum is always with us. But again, that is not enough to say that is the conventional I. But I think what we find most difficult, and this is where we got to, is to understand that the 5 aggregates are not the person. Okay, so someone may say, and that was 134, when it's stated that the aggregates are the self, this refers to the collection, not to the individual aggregates. So actually, there are 2 scenarios. We say the I is all the aggregates. What does that refer to? All the aggregates, does it mean each and every one of them? And that's pretty clear. Not each and every one of the aggregates, not each and every aspect of ourselves is the I. I mean, who would say the body is the I and the feelings is the I? That would really lead to this absurdity of the I is many. It just happens, we happen to have all these different many I's, and that's absurd. It doesn't feel that way, and very quickly we can let go of that view of the I. And again, in the meditative setting, it's a lot more effective to check and go through the different scenarios. So saying all the aggregates are the I, if it refers to each one of them being the I, that seems pretty absurd. So the only other option would be to say it's the collection of the aggregates. And very readily, oftentimes it feels like it cannot be just one. Okay, it cannot be separate. So it can only be all of them. And since it's not each one of them, it's the collection. And it's kind of like this word collection. It's kind of like a word where we feel like we don't really give it that much attention. It's almost like when you try to explain something difficult and you say it's an energy, and that's it. Oh, it's some type of energy. And then it seems to explain everything. Or it's some kind of potential, right? I have the potential to do this, that, and the other. And we're pretty satisfied with that without really understanding what that means. It's actually just labeling the word potential or energy onto something. And here we're doing exactly the same thing. We're labeling the word collection. Right? Collection. I mean, in actuality, as if there was some what is a collection? Is it all the aggregates? I mean, you can ask the same question if you say the I is the collection of the aggregates. Well, what is that collection? Show me this collection. Show me the collection of the aggregates. If you take something simpler than the aggregates, because the mind is difficult, so the mental aggregate is not easy. Take a piece of cake, you cut it into 12 pieces, and what is the cake? it's the collection of these 12 pieces. That's the cake. It's the collection. But what is the collection of the 12 pieces? Is it all of them? And each of those is the collection? Or is the collection merely labeled? I mean, like, without that alternative, what is the collection? What is all of them? It's all the individual ones. So it's really hard if you go a little deeper. What does that collection mean? It's just labeled. Okay, but of course, actually the argument, and later on it becomes a little clearer. It's not that clear from the text at this point. Here he just says, well, if you say the collection is the aggregates, well, we're talking about a savior. The Buddha said, you're your own savior, or you're your own protector. You are the tamed. You tame yourself. Well, that seems like it's not the 5 aggregates. I mean, you don't tame your little toe, right? Or it's not a protector, as in, like, if it's the collection of these aggregates, wouldn't that mean all of them are the savior, or all of them are the witness? There must be one of them, right? And so again, that's that difficulty to say the I is witness to your negative and positive actions and so forth. And then he goes on to say, it then takes more the example of the chariot, moving it away from the self, and the chariot, or whatever you want to choose. If you hang on to, and a lot of people do, hang on to the collection being the collection of the car is the car, for instance. Well, one argument in 135, it's actually not presented here. It comes a little bit further, a few verses down the line. So here it just says, where the collection itself, since the chariot and the self are alike, the mere collection of chariot parts would constitute the chariot. The mere collection, yeah. But what does that mean? The mere collection actually means the collection of the parts just all over the place. So if you put the chariot, you take it apart and you put it on a pile in the corner, you have the collection of the parts. But do you have a chariot? No. Obviously, just the mere collection of chariot parts is not sufficient. Now, how do you transfer that to the person? Well, how does the I and the body, how do they connect? What time is it? How do mind and body connect? Well, they have a karmic connection right now. So it's hard to believe the mind over here and the body over there. That would be at the time of death, right? So when is the time that mind and body are no longer linked in the way they're linked right now, where we can pretty much say, well, the mind is located. I mean, the mind is not located as such because it's non-physical, but of course the mind is inseparable from a very subtle energy wind, as it's called. And that energy wind is physical, and that is definitely located within the body. So we can talk about a location of body and mind. So if you take the chariot apart and you put the parts in all kinds of corners, do you have the collection of the parts? Yes, you do. But do you have them assembled in a specific way? No, you don't. So you have the collection, and the collection, that again is not enough. So how about the person? Before we were born into, well, whatever made up this body initially, the fertilized egg. Before those two came together, well, you had this body in the form of a fertilized egg and the mind. And that was a collection. Both of them were there, but of course not assembled in that way. And when we die, same thing. Mind separates from the body, leaves the body, and there's just a corpse. And again, you could say the collection of parts. So that doesn't work. And then it goes on to say that, so instead of going to the next possibility, so taking the same next possibility, and the possibilities that were mentioned, they're part of this 7 extremes, really, but not spelled out in that way yet. It comes a little bit, like I said, a few verses down there. It's spelled out more extensively. But really what Chandrakirti does here, he starts off with these 2 possibilities, one or different, okay. But then he spreads it out from there. So, but there are more other alternate possibilities in the sense it's, well, one or different. And then if it's one, there are other possibilities. If it's like the I is one with the aggregate, is one with the aggregates or closely connected to the aggregates, well, the collection of the aggregates or the shape of the aggregates and so forth. So this is all part of being one. And then, of course, this inherent I being dependent on the aggregates being dependent on that. So this is kind of moving away a little bit from the two possibilities of being one and different. But again, based on the sense of an inherent I, then considering is the I in the body or the body in the I, or sorry, is the aggregates within. So it's kind of formulated like dependent on or within. It's sometimes formulated this way, sometimes formulated another way, but that's not what we're looking at right here and right now. That comes a little bit later. What we're doing right here and right now is what I just said. As part of the idea, the I is the aggregates. Well, the collection of the aggregates, and that, like I said, is not enough because it does not consider the aggregates being connected or assembled in a certain way. And so here, if we just believe it's the collection of chariot parts, the collection of the chariot parts, that's the chariot, and the collection of mind and body, that is the person. Well, one problem here is that the sutra states that the sentient being, or that the sentient here, he calls it that, a sentient being is dependent upon the aggregates. So thus the mere convergence cannot be the self. That means basically that if something is dependent upon something, so dependent and dependee must be separate. Owner and that which is owned must be separate. So the sutra does talk about the self being the owner of the aggregates. That seems contradictory to what we heard earlier on, that we have a wrong sense that the I is the owner of mind and body. But of course, what is meant with this is the extreme view of the I being an inherent I that has this intrinsic existence, independent existence, somehow owning, being separate, being like a solid kind of concrete entity that owns mind and body. Here in this case, it rather means a labeled I. Of course, the sutras say there is a label. They take that as the basis, and then based on that idea, saying, well, yes, the I is the owner. The I is the owner of the mind and body. The mind and body, the collection of mind and body, is dependent on the I, and the I is dependent on mind and body. So that's what the sutras state. And it makes sense to us. I mean, we do talk on a conventional basis. The car is dependent on its parts, and the parts are dependent on the car. It totally makes sense. Although we do take inherent existence into consideration, but it's all mixed. It's like reality on the mere labeled basis. It makes total sense that the car is dependent on its parts, and the parts are dependent on the car. It makes perfect sense. So on a mere conventional level, this accords with reality, but not if the car is its parts. You cannot be at the same time the owner and that which is owned, the dependent and the dependee, if it's the same basis. So you don't say I'm dependent on myself, and myself I'm dependent on me, because it implies there's something different. They're not the same. The owner and that which is owned. It's not that a book is owned by itself. It's the owner of itself, and it's that which is owned by itself. That doesn't make any sense. Therefore, a further argument is here in the sutras, and here, just because the sutras say so, that's not enough, but it makes sense to us. I mean, we do think of the I being the owner, the car being the owner of its parts, and so forth. We don't talk like that, but there's definitely a sense it depends on its parts, and that which depends on something, that something and itself cannot be one. All right, that's 135. And the next verse is really saying, well, the other possibility, and actually it seems, and this is how I learned it, it's not in the commentaries, at least not in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary or the self-commentary, that it's the Samityas. There's a sub-school of the Vaibhashika school who are here presenting a lot of their arguments here, also with the shape. And it's not just the Samityas, not just this this Vaibhashika school, the sub-school, the 18 sub-schools, and one of them are the Samityas. It's not just them, but I seem to remember when we were presented the subjects, our teacher would talk of the Samitya school presenting these arguments. Anyway, whoever is presenting these arguments, based on previously the collection of the chariot is the chariot. Okay, so we've done this analysis, as I just described. What is the collection then? But as collection doesn't mean assembled in a certain way, then the Samityas, they would argue, well, if it's the collection of the parts, if they're assembled in a certain way, then this collection of a part, of course, has a certain shape. So the argument of the shape in relation to the chariot goes back to goes back to previously there was a sense the parts are not assembled. So it's the collection of the parts, but once they're assembled, these parts come with a certain shape. The shape, the outlines, or a certain shape, not just outline, but the shape in general of that car, by implication, the assembled car. By the assembled car,
Geshe has an internet problem. We'll wait for a minute. Thank you. You are on mute, Geshe. Your microphone is on mute.
sorry, I couldn't see myself, so I couldn't unmute myself. My apologies. We've been having internet problems, and the internet is gone right now. So I'm using a phone, but I have only limited. It's only I can only use it for a limited period. Anyway, how far did you hear me? When did I cut out? What was the last thing you heard me say?
Something about the Samityas being the sub-school.
Ah, okay, thank you. All right. Oh, okay. So the Samitya, the Vaibhashika school, they are here usually mentioned as the school that presents these arguments here. Now, the collection of the parts, strictly speaking, does not refer to the parts in this assembled way, or that's the argument at least. Chandrakirti would say, well, then the collection of the car, that is not, if you say the collection of the parts of the car, what about in an unassembled way. And then the argument of someone like the Sammitya would be, well, if you have the shape of the aggregate of the car, there's a specific shape. So that's just another way of saying the assembled parts. That's where the shape comes from. So the idea of the shape of the parts, that is really like another way of saying the assembled parts that make, of course, a certain shape. Now, this discussion, and I mentioned it before, but I cut out before, well, you couldn't hear me. I think I had this discussion with Gila the other day, because I did mention in a previous class, well, it's no problem with the chariot. The chariot is not a problem. But how can you transfer it to a person when you say a shape? That doesn't make sense, because it says here in the text, if their shape is the self. So if you take the shape of, and I hope it's clear enough, like think of the chariot with these extreme views. Okay, so the chariot is all of its parts, and all of its part means each and every one of its parts? No, the collection of its parts. If the answer is yes, that would be another extreme view. If it's the collection of the parts, well, then in an unassembled way or in an assembled way? Well, in an assembled way, of course, and in that way, it must be the shape of all the parts, because you can only have the unique shape of a car if you have all the parts assembled. So this is where the shape comes from. But how do you transfer that to the person, saying, okay, it has to be all the parts, but then the shape, the unique shape? And Gila suggested, well, maybe if you then transfer it to the person, it doesn't really literally mean the shape of the person as such, because that's just physical, but it includes all of those parts. I don't know. It doesn't say that. I mean, you would assume there. No, there's also a mind, and the mind doesn't have shape. But of course, then here Chandrakirti says, well, if their shape is the self, since that is a property of physical things, the body alone would be the self for you then. Okay, kind of saying, you seem to be saying just the shape is the self, and the shape can't be the self, because then the body shape is only found as part of the body, and the body is certainly not the self. The collection of mind and so on could not be the self, for they possess no shape configuration at all. So he seems to be saying the other person looks at it just from the point of view of shape. And like I said before, I don't know whether that's what the other school believes. I can only look at how Chandrakirti argues, but we do identify often strongly with the body, and possibly look at another person, just seeing the outlines and recognizing them for such. And that is very much part on a physical basis, just these outlines in a certain way. But here I'm just guessing. It doesn't say so anywhere. In fact, it doesn't explain this any further. It's just mentioning the shape. But I think the shape with an inanimate object is much easier understood. Okay, so I hope it's clear as far as we've gotten, I mean, this far. I hope it's clear. The argument, well, the mind cannot be the I, that in itself is not enough. The aggregates, well, the aggregates as a collection, that is also not enough. It has to be assembled in a certain way. And the thing is with the chariot, I mean, we need to spend some time with that, because the collection of the chariot assembled in a certain way seems to make sense. It seems to make sense. So that is usually where people get stuck. Leave the person aside. So for today, just focus on the car. If I were to say the collection of the parts assembled in a certain way, that is the car. Does that feel comfortable? Right? I see a little bit of nodding, at least some. It feels a little bit comfortable, doesn't it? But now let's take our everyday experience. If the car is all its parts, if it's all its parts, a collection of all its parts, then when you see a car, you have to see the collection of all its parts, right? when you touch a car, you have to touch the collection of all its parts. When you look at it, when you touch it, when you sit in the car, you have to sit within the collection of all its parts. So just from that point of view, or take a table. A car is more complicated, but every time we say anything about a table, it is never the collection of all the parts. You put something on the table. You say you put something on the table. Well, where do you really put it on? It's not like the entire table is covered. I mean, you can't put anything on the legs of the table. And still you say, I put it on the table. When in actuality, you don't put it on the collection of all the parts, do you? Right? And when you see a table, do you see the collection of all its parts? No, when you see the front, you don't see the back. When you see the back, you don't see the front. When you see the outside, you don't see the inside. I mean, how little do we really see of a table? When the table is dirty, well, how the collection of all its parts are dirty? Not true. So if the collection of all the parts were the table, then the way we speak would no longer make sense. No one would see a table at any given moment, right? If you see the table, no, I just see a part of the table. And then that part of the table, you still see the collection of the part of the table. I mean, we could no longer really talk. Like it would make no sense. Okay, you hold a table, you hold onto a table. Like if you just hold the leg of a table, you don't hold onto a table because you don't hold on to the collection of the part. When you meet a person, you meet someone. What does that actually mean? I meet someone. You meet the collection of the part of the person. Where's the meeting? Which part did you actually meet? Well, right, you kind of bump into them, and then you bump in all the collection of the part, his heart, his liver, right? It doesn't happen. So really, it becomes more and more bizarre if we don't assume labels on the basis of its parts. I touch a certain area and I can say, I'll touch the table. With labeling, it works perfectly. I sit in a certain part of the car, I can say I sit in the car, right? I mean, something that Jimmy said today, and I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but this whole idea of like identifying with my whole country, I was just reminded of this crazy thing about football. I mean, it's sometimes pretty crazy, like, world championships and stuff. So I was just thinking recently, I don't even know how to kick a ball straight. So I certainly don't know anything about football. And most people I know, they're not really good at playing football. And still, because there are these 11 guys that I don't know any of them, right? And they're doing their thing on the field somewhere with a group of another 11 guys and wearing a certain colored shirt, not even coming from Germany, they're from all over the world. And this year's this group, and next year's a different group. And just because they happen to, get the ball in this little goal thing, we won. I won. It's like, what? Right? I mean, okay, so we won the collection of parts. If we means all of Germans, right? And I mean, we didn't win. I mean, Germany didn't win, but let's assume we won, right? It's like the collection of Germans won this football game, but I would be scared if it looks pretty hard, this ball, I'm scared I hurt myself to kind of kick against the ball. So, I mean, I wouldn't be able to kick it. And still to say we won, I mean, who wins a football game, right? The collection of this football team. Okay, so Germany, forget about Germany, can no longer. So nothing makes sense that a certain country wins a football game or a country has invaded, and nothing. We couldn't talk any longer. Nothing would make any more sense. Do you see where I'm getting at? I mean, the football game is just one extreme. So therefore, to believe the collection of we have to stop talking. Literally, we could no longer communicate because it would be so wrong what we're saying. I touched the table because I touched a part of it. No, that would not be sufficient. Am I making sense? Does that part make sense? Or if I get sick, my collection of parts has to get sick. if a certain country wins the, I don't know, the European football championship or whatever they're called, well, the whole country would have to win. Literally, it's not enough. It's 7 guys, right? And so forth. Okay, so I hope I was able to, well, kind of convey that part a little bit. I mean, to the degree that it would be so absurd. That's the first thing we choose. Merely labeled doesn't seem satisfactory, and of course, it's on fast hearing. There must be something more than that. But the absurdities are just, yeah, well, there are too many of them. Okay, so I may try just quickly to go back to the other internet connection. So I apologize if I'm suddenly gone. It's just my SIM card won't last long enough. Okay, just a sec. Can you still hear me? Yes, or okay, great. All right, now it's time to do some meditation. I've got 15 minutes left. I'm sorry if I bombarded you with a lot today. It didn't feel as much when I thought about it in my mind, but now I realize it is a lot. You'll be bombarded for quite some time until we get through this particular topic. But as I said, it is one of the main topics and it requires a lot of analysis from different sides. Okay, great. So let's do some meditation then, starting with some breathing meditation, just to let go of any disruptive thoughts, unconcentrated states of mind, and so forth. And then I'll guide you through the meditation. So once again, try to take a moment to turn your attention inwards at your own sense of an I. Who are you? Or how does yourself appear to you? As merely labeled based on mind and body, or more than that? Now, since it doesn't make sense to think as the I as totally separate, as that inherent self, to be totally separate from mind and body. take a moment to check whether you're comfortable with the thought that the eye is the collection of mind and body. And if you yourself are the collection of your aggregates, that would mean that a car is a collection of its parts, and a table is a collection of the table parts. But then it would no longer make sense to say, I see a table. Because it's impossible to see the collection of all of its parts. Since we only see a part of its surface and parts of its legs. And if those parts just their outside, so if a table is all of its parts, I would no longer see a table. I couldn't touch a table because I can't touch all of the parts, at least not at a certain point in time. Can I touch the collection of all the parts? I couldn't put anything on the table since I cannot put something on the collection of all the parts. then transferring it to a person. I could not be aware of myself. Since I'm not aware of the collection of all my parts. And I couldn't see another person. Since I only ever perceive certain parts of their body. And I see their the front part of their body. I don't see their back part of the body, and vice versa. What does it mean to meet a person? How do I meet the collection of all the parts of a person? What does it mean to study? How does the collection of all my parts read a book? Study the Dharma. What does it mean for a country to invade another country, or for a country to win a gold medal? The Olympic Games. Do all the parts of that country invade another country or win a gold medal? And in order for you to visit New York City, do you have to be in every part? Must have visited every part of New York City to be able to say you visited that place? And since all these possibilities the I being just the mind, the I being each and every aggregate, or the I being the collection of the aggregates, since they're all upset, do not account for our everyday experience, what are we left with? With an I that is merely labeled on the basis of the collection of its parts, or any of its parts. And likewise, a table merely labeled on any of its parts. Making it sensible to say, I see the table based on seeing a part of the table. Since I label table on the part that I see. Labeling, I've seen another person on the basis of having seen the face of that person. Or labeling I walk based on my legs walking. Without there existing anything beyond the merely labeled I, the merely labeled table, and so forth. And since our attachment does not hold on to a merely labeled I, but to an I that doesn't exist at all. To let go of our attachment to the I or as it's also called, our self-centeredness. Worry less, experience less fear, and focus more on the welfare of others. Now to conclude this analysis, spend a few moments single-pointedly focusing on whatever insight you've gained. And allow for this to sink deeper onto a more emotional level that affects your daily actions. And then finally, to dedicate the virtuous potential we've accumulated today, may of course be a cause for us one day, for the welfare of all sentient beings, to attain the enlightened state of the Buddha. And may it lengthen the life of our kind lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the lives of all the other great masters alive right now, so that they may continue to turn the wheel of Dharma. And of course, may whatever virtue we've accumulated help all ordinary people right now to get rid of physical illness, like Tali Lubin, and all others who are sick and ill and unable to lead a normal life. May it likewise affect those who have mental diseases, mental problems, and peace of mind. And especially those in areas of the world where people suffer great political turmoil or from calamities, natural calamities. And of course, let's dedicate the way Shantideva expresses it in his prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And especially for as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain. Until then, may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, that was quite long today. Okay, so I was clear what to do for next week. Again, bodhicitta, especially at times when you feel your mind is very narrow, it's very, well, narrow-minded, to then apply this as an antidote in that moment. But of course, also during your personal meditation time, to focus on past lives, the relationships, the changing relationships that we've had with all sentient beings, but in particular to focus on the fact that all sentient beings have at some point been so kind to us, so close to us, have done everything for us, have sacrificed their own life for us. So to specifically focus on that and get a sense this is true for each and every being, so that you're basically walking on the street and have a sense, oh, that's that person. I don't recognize them to have had that relationship with them, or I don't remember, but I've definitely been so close to them, and now we just both have forgotten about it. Okay, great. As a preparation to grow even closer to others. Okay, lovely, that's it. So
Thank you
wish you
so
a
much.
good week. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. We are celebrating this week the new year in Israel. So I'd like to wish you all a happy new Jewish year, and for the Israelis, a merry holiday this week. On Wednesday and Thursday, as a present to us all, His Holiness for the new year is giving a teaching, Chandrakirti text, Entering the Middle Way, very early in the morning. What a lovely way to start the morning, the day. What a lovely way to start the year. So thank you all very much. Take care. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Dankeschön. Happy
Thank
New
you,
Year.
Geshe-la.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Laila tov.
Bye.
Laila tov.